On a crisp autumn morning in the quiet town of Little Haven, an eerie hush replaced the usual sounds of laughter and friendly greetings. Flyers with a smiling child's face appeared on every telephone pole. The local news station, KCTL, broke the headline, "Little girl goes missing, only her German shepherd knows what really happened." Fear settled like fog among the residents, who whispered prayers and searched for answers. In a place where everyone thought they knew each other, a simple family routine was shattered in the blink of an eye. And at the center of it all stood a devoted dog named Kaiser, hiding a secret no one else could witness. The morning Lucy Harris disappeared started out like any other. 8-year-old Lucy, with bright blue eyes and a wide grin, burst into her parents' bedroom, patting her father's shoulder to wake him. Sunlight threaded through the curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Kaiser, their 3-year-old German shepherd, padded behind Lucy, tail wagging, protective as ever of his small best friend. Lucy was dressed in her favorite pale yellow dress, and she carried a stuffed dinosaur, an old plush toy that had seen better days but still meant the world to her. Her father, Charles Harris, a kind man with a sturdy build, yawned and stretched. He gently ruffled Lucy's hair, marveling at how each day she seemed more energetic than the last. "You're up early, kiddo," he remarked, smiling as Lucy grinned back. Her mother, Ellen, still dozed beneath the covers, so Lucy tiptoed away, giggling at the challenge of being quiet. The whole house smelled of fresh coffee that Charles had brewed earlier, filling the modest home with warm notes that promised the start of a pleasant day. Little Haven was not the type of place one would expect trouble to roam. Surrounded by gently rolling hills and dotted with Victorian-style houses, it was a town that seemed paused in time. People still visited neighbors unannounced, local produce markets thrived, and the antique clock in the town's square chimed faithfully every hour. Lucy's family lived near the outskirts, where their backyard touched the beginnings of a lush forest that seemed an endless playground to her. Kaiser was her steadfast companion there. Together, they spent weekends running between tall evergreens, playing fetch and weaving imaginary tales about woodland fairies. Not far away, Redwood National and State Parks provided a breathtaking canopy of giant sequoia trees, attracting tourists who made their way through Little Haven's cozy streets. The townspeople prided themselves on local legends and small traditions, like the annual Harvest Festival near the Redwood Groves. Every October, Lucy's family would stroll under towering trees, listening to their whispers in the wind, sharing roasted chestnuts and marveling at the grandeur of nature. Life here was supposed to be safe, even ordinary, until that fateful day Lucy vanished. That morning, no one could have predicted the tragedy about to unfold. There was just the gentleness of sunrise, the earthy smell of dew, and Lucy's laughter echoing through the hall. She was supposed to catch the bus for school in a short while. Ellen, still half asleep, eventually rose, gave Lucy a quick kiss on the forehead, and asked her to wash up. Kaiser lay on the rug, his eyes keen and ears perked, as though he sensed something was off, even when no one else did. He let out a low whine, shifting uneasily. Unaware of any impending danger, Charles and Ellen continued their routine, Charles flipping through the latest headlines on his phone, and Ellen packing Lucy's lunch. Lucy herself bounded off to her room to fetch her backpack, Kaiser following at her heels. Outside, the morning air was crisp but welcoming. It was just another day on the surface, yet in a few hours, all illusions of safety would vanish. The first sign that something was wrong came when Lucy didn't return for dinner. Normally, she'd arrive home by 3:30 p.m. on the dot, greeting Kaiser with a big hug, then bouncing into the kitchen to tell Ellen all about her day. But that afternoon, the clock ticked on, the minute hand dragging along to 4, then 5, and still no sign of Lucy. Concern gave way to dread. Charles, who worked at the local hardware store, tried to shake off his growing anxiety as he picked up the phone to call Lucy's elementary school. The secretary's voice was calm but uncertain. She confirmed that Lucy had indeed gotten on the bus to go home at the usual time. The bus driver reported that Lucy was the third child to get off at her stop, 1 block away from their house. After that, no one knew what happened. Ellen felt a chill ripple through her body. She grabbed her coat and rushed out the door with Charles, calling Lucy's name up and down the deserted block, pounding on neighbors' doors to see if they had seen her. Faces scrunched with worry but offered no helpful answers. Even Kaiser seemed frantic, whining and pulling at his leash, as though trying to track Lucy's scent. The late afternoon sky grew clouded, foreboding. With mounting terror, the Harrises dialed the police. Officers arrived just before the first threads of evening twilight painted the horizon. They combed the area in small search teams. Flashlights flickered through front yards, alleyways, and the nearby forest. The air felt charged, every cricket's chirp a jolt to Ellen's trembling nerves. She clutched Lucy's stuffed dinosaur, tears threatening to spill. Charles tried to stay strong, but his face was drawn with dread. They both dreaded the same question that lingered unspoken. What if she's gone forever? Around 8:00 p.m., the official search was suspended for the night, set to resume at first light. That left the Harrises to the dark weight of an empty house. Kaiser paced the living room, nails clicking against the hardwood floor. Every so often, he sniffed at the front door or whined at Lucy's bedroom as though calling her to come back. The tension was thick. Ellen rummaged through Lucy's closet, searching desperately for any clue. But everything seemed ordinary: her school notebooks, her artwork of unicorns and trees pinned to the walls, her mismatched socks still in the hamper. Nothing explained why Lucy hadn't come home. As the hours wore on, the magnitude of the crisis grew. The local news station, KCTL, put out an alert with Lucy's photo. Neighbors assembled in small groups at the corner of Walnut and Main, discussing possible sightings. A single street lamp flickered ominously on the deserted sidewalk. The sense of community that had once given Little Haven its charm became a trembling mass of worry and whispered rumors. Kaiser, alert to every tremor of fear in the house, refused to eat or lie down. He sniffed at Lucy's backpack, left behind on the couch where she'd dropped it that morning. He let out a long, plaintive whine. Something about his demeanor suggested he knew more than he could express. Yet to everyone else, he was just a dog unable to reveal what his keen senses had perceived when Lucy stepped off that school bus. That night was the first time Ellen allowed her mind to wander to the absolute worst possibilities. She couldn't help but think of strangers, criminals, people who lurked beyond the sphere of Little Haven's perceived safety. But the idea was so terrifying she pushed it away, clinging instead to the fleeting hope that Lucy would simply walk through the front door at any moment, apologizing for being late. All she had was hope, and it was wearing thin. By dawn, the police had organized a more extensive search party. Volunteers streamed in from all corners of Little Haven: shop owners, teachers, retirees, and even the local firefighters. The Redwood National and State Parks rangers offered to extend the search into some of the deeper trails leading away from town. Everyone recognized Lucy's face from the flyers and her family's public pleas on social media. She was part of the community, a neighbor's daughter, a friend's classmate, the cheerful girl who fed sugar cubes to horses at the yearly fair. Charles and Ellen stood on their porch, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep, as a wave of volunteers gathered on their lawn. Kaiser remained tethered to Charles, pacing nervously. The lead officer, Detective Maria O'Leary, a stern but compassionate woman who had once guided the town through lesser crises, briefed the assembled crowd. She mentioned how each second was critical, urging everyone to spread out and look for any sign of Lucy. Kaiser's ears twitched at the mention of Lucy's name. He strained at the leash, trying to lead the group somewhere. It didn't take long for the detectives to realize the German Shepherd might actually have a strong lead. After all, Kaiser was Lucy's companion, and if anyone could catch Lucy's trail, it might be him. Detective O'Leary approached Charles, who held Kaiser's leash in a firm but trembling grip. "Why don't we see where he takes us?" she suggested gently. Charles nodded. He knelt beside Kaiser, stroking the dog's head. "Find Lucy," he said softly, though his voice cracked. Kaiser sniffed the ground, then trotted forward with purpose. Volunteers followed at a distance, but curiosity burned in every step. The dog led them to the bus stop just down the street. It was the last place Lucy had been seen, according to the bus driver's testimony. Sniffing around the patch of grass and the curb, Kaiser circled a few times before heading off in the direction of a small wooded area that separated the neighborhood from a winding creek. The group fanned out, calling Lucy's name. The tension was palpable. Though the forest here was not large, it was dense enough that a person could remain unseen. Kaiser moved quickly, checking behind tree trunks, sniffing at roots. Now and then he would pause, as if uncertain or trying to pick up a faint trace. Charles kept up, though fear weighed on him like an anchor. Each moment felt like an eternity, the sense that Lucy was somewhere close, but just out of reach. At one point, Kaiser sniffed a torn piece of fabric caught on a low branch. Detective O'Leary carefully examined it, yellow cotton with a small bit of embroidered flower. Ellen, who had followed anxiously, gasped. Lucy's favorite yellow dress. A wave of horror and relief collided within her. Horror that Lucy's dress was torn. Relief that at least they had a tangible clue. That piece of fabric proved Lucy had been through this part of the woods. Hope surged again, fueling the searchers. Yet, hour by hour, the day dragged on with no sign of Lucy herself. The trees gave way to the creek, shimmering in the midday sun. Kaiser sniffed along the bank, circled back, and whined as though confused. The trail seemed to end there, as if Lucy had vanished into thin air. Detective O'Leary called in a K9 unit from a neighboring district to assist. But ironically, it was Kaiser Lucy's own dog who seemed the most determined, the most aware of something missing. He let out a deep bark that reverberated through the silent afternoon, a call into the unknown. Still, the creek revealed no footprints, and the water's calm surface offered no clues. Frustration mounted. People began to whisper that maybe Lucy had been taken by someone who had a boat or a hidden path. The magnitude of the situation pressed down on everyone. By sundown, the volunteers were exhausted and heartsick. Ellen wept openly, her body trembling against Charles's comforting arm. Detective O'Leary promised they would continue searching early the next morning, but the knot of fear only tightened in the Harrises' chests. Lucy was still missing, and no one knew why. Night fell again, bringing quiet dread. Charles tried to reassure Ellen, recounting every reason Lucy would be found safe. But darkness seemed to mock his optimism. In the dimly lit living room, photographs of Lucy smiling, Lucy with Kaiser, Lucy riding a pony at the local fair, each image was a heartbreak in itself. Ellen clutched Lucy's stuffed dinosaur to her chest, refusing to let it go. Charles made them both a mug of chamomile tea, though neither had any appetite. Detective O'Leary showed up around 9 that evening to get a more detailed timeline from the Harrises. She had a notebook out and began with simple questions, gentle yet pointed. "Were there any family disputes?" she asked, her tone calm. Charles and Ellen shook their heads vehemently. They adored Lucy, and arguments in their household were mostly trivial. "Any strangers lingering around the neighborhood recently?" O'Leary continued. Again, the Harrises couldn't think of anyone suspicious. The detective looked at them for a long moment, empathy in her eyes, but also a glimmer of something else, suspicion. Protocol demanded she consider all possibilities. She asked where Charles and Ellen were at every hour of that day, who else had access to their house. If Lucy had complained about anything unusual at school, while the questions made sense, they left Charles and Ellen feeling uneasy. It occurred to them that in many missing child cases, investigators first look closely at the parents. Despite their heartbreak, they realized they were under silent scrutiny. Their tears, once a symbol of despair, also felt like evidence to be examined. After Detective O'Leary left, the couple sat in stillness for several minutes. Then Charles rubbed his face, exhaustion bleeding through his voice. "What if they start thinking we had something to do with it?" he asked, half ashamed to give voice to the fear. Ellen shook her head. "No, that's impossible. Everyone knows how much we love Lucy." Yet the seed of anxiety was planted. Would the police waste precious time doubting them? Kaiser, lying at Ellen's feet, gave a soft grunt. He nudged her hand with his nose. She stroked his head absently, her tears dripping onto his thick fur. In that moment, Kaiser's presence was the only stable thing in the shifting ground of their lives. He had been there that morning. Had he seen something? If only he could speak, to tell them of any sinister figure that might have approached Lucy. But all he could do was whine and press his muzzle to her lap, an unspoken vow of loyalty. Unable to sleep, Ellen and Charles spent hours in Lucy's bedroom, as though being in her small sanctuary might bring them closer to an answer. Posters of cartoon princesses on the walls, crayons scattered on a desk, a half-finished puzzle, every fragment of Lucy's life seemed frozen in time. If only it could speak to them. If only there was some sign, an open window, a note, a clue, but the silence was absolute. Eventually, they returned to the living room and flicked on the TV to watch the late-night news. Lucy's photograph flashed on the screen, followed by a reporter recounting the day's unsuccessful search. Residents of Little Haven were urged to remain vigilant and report anything suspicious. It was as if the entire region was collectively holding its breath. Yet through that broadcast, no new answers emerged, only a deepening awareness that a mystery had settled over the town like a dark shroud. Early the next morning, the Harrises were awakened by frantic barking. Kaiser stood by the front door, nails scraping the wood, demanding to be let out. Charles rushed to open it, and the German shepherd bolted into the yard, sniffing the air with an urgency that brought a flicker of hope. Maybe Kaiser had picked up Lucy's scent again. Charles grabbed a leash, following him, but Kaiser only dashed to the edge of the lawn, growling at a shadow that vanished behind the neighbor's fence. Charles glimpsed a figure, darting away, a hooded silhouette that melted into the early dawn gloom. Heart pounding, Charles shouted at the stranger to stop, but they were gone in seconds. Had someone been spying on the house? Fear tightened like a vise in Charles's chest. He stood there, panting from adrenaline, Kaiser growling softly beside him. When Ellen heard what happened, her face went pale. Was someone stalking them or searching for something in their yard? She immediately called Detective O'Leary, who promised to send a patrol car. A swirl of paranoia gripped them. Had Lucy been abducted by a local person who was now watching the house for their next move? The day carried on in a haze of dread and rumors. Some neighbors mentioned a suspicious car seen driving slowly through the streets at night. Others whispered about the possibility that Lucy might have run away, a theory the Harrises dismissed. She was only 8, full of life, and had no reason to leave home. As if to confirm their suspicions, Kaiser continued to show signs of distress, pacing near the windows, letting out guttural growls whenever a car rolled by. It was as though he could sense something lurking, just out of sight. Detective O'Leary returned that afternoon, accompanied by an officer who specialized in analyzing footprints and small clues. They examined the yard and found a set of partial shoe prints near the fence. Nothing conclusive, but it suggested someone had indeed been there. They asked Charles and Ellen about any family acquaintances who might have exhibited unusual behavior, but the Harrises came up blank. They trusted their community. Little Haven was not the kind of place where neighbors locked their doors in daylight. Meanwhile, Kaiser seemed fixated on Lucy's room, repeatedly pushing his snout against the closed door and whimpering. Every time Ellen opened it, he would circle the space as if searching for her, sniffing the air, then whining with unspoken frustration. She tried to console him, but her own anguish made the gesture feel hollow. She realized that, in many ways, Kaiser was just as frantic to find Lucy as they were. That evening, Charles scrolled through a backlog of Lucy's pictures on social media, hoping to spot something, perhaps a stranger's face in the background, a comment that seemed out of place, any new friend she might have mentioned. But Lucy was 8, supervised online by her parents, with minimal digital footprint. Nothing stood out. Despair seeped in deeper with every unanswered question. Then, a knock at the door startled them both. It was their neighbor, Maria Ortiz, holding a small plastic bag. In it was a silver hairpin that Lucy had worn the week before, a butterfly-shaped clip Lucy adored. Maria explained she'd found it on her back porch that morning and wondered if it might be Lucy's. Ellen's face crumpled. It was definitely Lucy's. But why was it on Maria's porch, several houses away from the bus stop? Was Lucy trying to leave a trail? Or had someone dropped it there to throw off the search? This new revelation made the puzzle even more perplexing. The Harrises thanked Maria for coming forward and handed the hairpin over to the detective. As Maria left, Ellen sank onto the couch, the weight of another failed day pressing down on her. She held Charles's hand, and though their grips were tight, she felt as if the world was slipping away. Kaiser rested his muzzle on her knee, gazing up at her with soft, sorrowful eyes. She stroked his ear, wishing she could tap into his canine memory. If only he could recount the entire day from the moment Lucy stepped off that bus. If only he could speak words instead of barks. Days blurred into a painful repetition of searches and dead ends. Detective O'Leary canvassed the neighborhood repeatedly, her questions slowly shifting from polite inquiries to the sharper edge of deeper investigation. Local newspapers ran headlines like, "Where is Lucy Harris? The town desperate for answers." Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Lucy had been kidnapped by a passing traveler, others whispered of a family secret. Through it all, the Harrises tried to remain cooperative with law enforcement and hopeful in spirit. But the strain was showing. Amid the chaos, Kaiser became more subdued, almost depressed. He refused his usual meals of Purina Pro Plan food he had always devoured. When Ellen tried to feed him by hand, he gently licked her palm and turned away. He spent most of his time near the front door or Lucy's bedroom, as if expecting her to burst in any second. The silence in the house grew oppressive, thick with unshed tears and unspoken fears. Late one afternoon, an officer arrived unannounced to question Charles and Ellen again. This time, his tone carried an undertone of skepticism. He asked about their finances, Lucy's inheritance from her late grandparents, whether Charles or Ellen might stand to gain from any insurance policy. The insinuation stung. Charles bristled, anger flaring at the notion that they would ever harm Lucy for money. Ellen, trembling, demanded to know why the detective was focusing on them instead of finding her daughter. The officer tried to placate her with talk of procedure, but the damage was done. A rift formed between the Harrises and the investigation. They felt alone in their suffering, wondering if the police were looking in the right places at all. Meanwhile, the community's empathy started to shift into suspicion. People worried, speculated, and even turned inquisitive eyes on the Harrises themselves. Charles overheard whispered conversations at the grocery store, rumors that maybe Lucy's home life wasn't as perfect as they claimed. Each rumor felt like a betrayal. Under normal circumstances, the close-knit nature of Little Haven was a comfort. Now it felt suffocating. Throughout it all, Kaiser's role as a silent witness became increasingly significant. More than once, Detective O'Leary tried to use him to trace Lucy's path, bringing him items of Lucy's clothing to sniff. Yet each time, Kaiser led them only as far as the creek in the small wooded area. It was as though Lucy's trail simply vanished at the water's edge. Had she fallen in? There were no signs of drowning or disturbance near the bank, and the water was too shallow to conceal a body. The puzzle only deepened. On the 7th day of the search, the Redwood National and State Parks rangers, along with a police helicopter, scoured a broader stretch of land. Charles and Ellen huddled in their living room, hearts pounding every time the phone rang. But each ring brought only more questions and no breakthroughs. The sense of impotence was overwhelming. That night, Charles found Ellen sitting on Lucy's bed, stroking the blanket and staring at the empty pillow. She turned to him, eyes red and puffy. "I feel like I'm losing my mind," she whispered. "She has to be out there, scared, waiting for us." He wanted to tell her it was all going to be fine, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he pulled her into a tight embrace, the two of them clinging to each other in the midst of an unimaginable storm. By the 8th day, exhaustion weighed on everyone. Ellen decided she couldn't sit idly anymore, no matter how the police insisted they handle the investigation. She and Charles resolved to conduct their own more personal search. Armed with flashlights, they ventured deep into the nearby woods with Kaiser, treading paths the volunteer teams might have overlooked. The forest was dense with old pines and tangled undergrowth. A faint mist clung to the ground, giving the air a cold, eerie feel. Even in daytime, the tall trees filtered the sunlight into a dull glow. Kaiser led the way, tail held high, ears perked, occasionally stopping to sniff at the base of a tree or a pile of leaves. Charles and Ellen trailed behind, their eyes scanning every nook, calling Lucy's name. Beneath the silence of nature, their own pulses thundered in their ears. Each crack of a twig made them jump, hearts lodged in their throats. Then, without warning, Kaiser let out a short, urgent bark and broke into a run. Charles and Ellen followed, stumbling over exposed roots and brushing aside low-hanging branches. Kaiser led them down a narrow, hidden trail that curved deeper into the forest. The undergrowth was thick and seemed untouched by prior search parties. With each step, Ellen's anxiety surged. She dreaded what they might find. Eventually, Kaiser stopped, sniffing at a fallen log. The faint glint of something metallic caught Charles's eye, a small necklace, half buried in the moss. He bent down to pick it up, his breath stalling in his chest. It was Lucy's silver locket, the one her grandmother had given her last Christmas. Inside was a tiny photograph of Lucy, holding Kaiser as a puppy. Ellen's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming silently. This was undeniable proof. Lucy had been in this exact spot. They looked around frantically for more clues. There, behind the log, the grass was flattened in a way that suggested someone had recently lain there. Footprints small, like Lucy's size, merged with larger ones. Ellen's heart pounded. She was here, but was she still? And who had been with her? At that moment, Kaiser began pawing at the ground. His ears went back, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. It was as though he sensed something ominous nearby. Charles tried to calm him, but Kaiser's gaze fixed on a cluster of bushes a few yards away. He barked, the sound echoing through the stillness. Charles approached, bracing himself for the worst, but behind the bushes there was no body, only an old blanket, rumpled with a few empty food wrappers scattered around. They recognized them as Lucy's favorite snack bars, the same type Ellen often packed in her lunch. Ellen collapsed to her knees, heartbreak and relief mingling in her sobs. The blanket was worn, but not one from their house. It was foreign, stained, and had a faint odor. A sign Lucy might have been kept here, or hid here, for some time. Kaiser whined, nudging the blanket. Charles steadied himself. If Lucy had been here, she was probably moved, or moved on her own. They both realized that whoever had taken Lucy might still be in the area. Fear pulsed through them, but they refused to abandon their find. They called Detective O'Leary immediately, who arrived with a small team and taped off the area. The detective's face was grim but determined as she surveyed the clues. They bagged the locket and the blanket for forensic analysis. For the first time in days, Charles and Ellen felt a jolt of hope mixed with terror. Lucy's trail was not cold. She had been alive, possibly recently. Kaiser had found the evidence no one else had. As they left the woods, exhaustion clung to them, but a new spark of resolve burned in their chests. Whatever had happened, Lucy was close by, and Kaiser was their key to unlocking the mystery. The evidence found in the woods led the police to refocus their search efforts. They set up a perimeter around the spot where Lucy's belongings were discovered, combing the area for more signs. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning the thick canopy. The sound of distant search dogs barking laced the air. Yet, despite the renewed energy, Lucy herself remained elusive. Forensic analysis confirmed Lucy's DNA on the blanket. That revelation brought heartbreak and anger. Someone had been holding her, or at least she'd been forced to hide. Stranger still was the partial DNA from another person on the edge of the blanket. The results were inconclusive, but it wasn't Charles or Ellen. The police began building a profile, suspecting an unknown individual, likely local given the nature of the area. The Harrises were tormented by a single question: who would do this? Little Haven was a small town. Even if the abductor was an outsider, someone might have seen something. Detective O'Leary urged the public to check security cameras, dash cams, and any possible sightings. Thousands of tips poured in, but most were dead ends. One lead, however, stood out. A retired teacher, Miss S. Loomis, lived near the forest edge. She reported hearing muffled voices and a child's cry late one night. She initially dismissed it as imagination, but in retrospect, it might have been Lucy. When pressed for details, Miss S. Loomis described hearing an adult voice, low and agitated, telling someone to hush. O'Leary took this seriously, dispatching officers to canvass the area. Word of this new information spread quickly, fueling speculation. Some neighbors privately accused the Harrises of not watching Lucy more carefully. Others theorized about transients or travelers passing through Redwood National Park. The tension in Little Haven grew thick, a sense that no one was safe until Lucy was found. Amid the swirling chaos, Kaiser remained the Harrises' rock. He followed Charles and Ellen everywhere, as if guarding them from invisible threats. Every evening, he would sit near the living room window, gazing outside with vigilant eyes. Sometimes, he'd whine at the shadowy corners of the yard, but no one else was there. Charles started to wonder if whoever lurked outside their fence days ago was still watching. The Harrises could hardly sleep. Ellen, plagued by nightmares, woke with Lucy's name on her lips, reaching for the empty space where her daughter should be. Charles tried to console her, but his own emotional reserves were depleted. They found fleeting solace in each other's arms, yet the question of Lucy's whereabouts remained a constant, gnawing ache. One evening, as Charles paced the house, he paused by a framed photograph of Lucy hugging Kaiser as a puppy. A memory rushed over him. The time Lucy first begged for a dog of her own, how she'd saved up her allowance to buy Kaiser a special collar. He realized that from the moment Kaiser entered their family, Lucy's safety had become his silent vow. Now, in the midst of this unimaginable situation, Kaiser stood unwavering, seemingly aware of the gravity that no one else could fully comprehend. In that stillness, Charles had a realization. Lucy and Kaiser shared a deep bond. If Kaiser had physically guided them to the blanket and Lucy's locket, perhaps there was more he could do if given the chance. Perhaps it wasn't just a matter of random luck that they found these clues. Maybe Kaiser knew exactly where he had to lead them next, if only they could read the signs. Armed with a renewed sense of purpose, Charles decided to organize a private expedition into the forest again. This time, he wanted to let Kaiser guide them without the large crowds and commotion of official search parties. Large groups might intimidate the perpetrator if they were still around, or mask the subtle scents. Kaiser was tracking. Detective O'Leary was hesitant, but gave a cautious green light, sending a single plainclothes officer to accompany them. So, in the early dawn light, Charles, Ellen, Kaiser, and Officer Danvers set off. The officer carried a small camera to document anything they might find, as well as a concealed weapon in case of danger. Kaiser trotted ahead, nose to the ground. Occasionally he'd pause, sniff the air, then bark softly, continuing deeper into the dense growth of pines and fern-lined pathways. Ellen gripped Charles's hand tightly. Fear battled with hope in her chest. The forest canopy filtered sunlight into shifting beams. Birdsong mingled with the distant hum of a creek. Every step felt weighted, each turn of the trail a potential breakthrough or heartbreak. No one spoke much, allowing Kaiser to work unhindered. They passed the log and bushes where Lucy's blanket had been found, pressing further into unknown territory. An hour into the trek, Kaiser suddenly froze, the fur on his back raised. He let out a low growl. Officer Danvers motioned for everyone to stay behind him. His eyes scanned the surroundings. They were at a narrow clearing where the grass was flattened in patches. Ellen's heart hammered. Could this be another site where Lucy was kept? Kaiser darted forward, sniffing frantically. It was then that Charles saw something in the grass, a small, tattered piece of notebook paper. He picked it up, hands trembling. On one side, in a child's scrawling handwriting, was a single word, Mummy. The realization that Lucy had written this shattered Ellen's composure. She dropped to her knees, tears flooding her vision. Charles wrapped an arm around her, feeling torn between grief and relief. Lucy was alive when she wrote this. But where was she now? Officer Danvers gently took the paper, slipping it into an evidence bag. He pointed out footprints near the clearing, 2 sets of adult footprints. One pair larger, one slightly smaller, perhaps a woman's or an older child's. They overlapped Lucy's smaller prints. The signs indicated a struggle or hurried movement. This was the first tangible proof that Lucy was possibly moved through these woods, day by day, or had left these notes as a desperate signal. The group continued, hearts pounding, adrenaline surging. Another half hour of searching revealed nothing further. Eventually, Kaiser began to whine, looking confused and circling back. It appeared the trail ended again. Officer Danvers frowned. They might be using the creek or covering their tracks, he murmured, scanning the map of the area. If there was a cunning abductor, they could be moving in irregular patterns to evade detection. Still, the discovery of Lucy's note changed everything. It meant she was leaving signs, or at least trying to. She was alive and resourceful enough to attempt communication. That glimmer of hope ignited a new fire in the Harrises. Lucy was resilient, and if she could, she would try to find a way to get help. Now, they had to match her courage, no matter the cost. Back at the Harris home, Detective O'Leary examined the note with a forensic team. The crumpled paper matched the type Lucy used in her school notebooks, and her handwriting sample from class confirmed the letters were hers. For the first time in over a week, O'Leary allowed herself a brief smile. "Lucy is fighting to be found," she said, her voice steady. "We just have to keep up the pressure." Rumors still swirled in town, but after word got out about the note, public sentiment shifted back towards supporting the Harrises. People held nightly vigils at the local church, lighting candles for Lucy's safe return. Prayers and tears mingled in the candlelit glow, adding a solemn beauty to the heartbreak. Charles and Ellen, drained yet determined, attended these vigils, leaning on the community's empathy. Behind the scenes, Detective O'Leary expanded her resources, contacting federal agents with expertise in child abduction cases. If Lucy had been moved across state lines, Time was running out. They cross-referenced every known offender within 100 miles, but no immediate suspect emerged. The Redwood National Park Rangers intensified patrols, and the entire region felt on edge. Meanwhile, Kaiser's role continued to intrigue the investigators. On multiple occasions, he led small teams to inconsequential areas, only to suddenly backtrack and whine as if he'd lost the scent. O'Leary suggested a theory. Lucy's abductor might have taken steps to mask their trail, possibly using strong scents or doubling back frequently. It was an exhausting cat-and-mouse game, but one thing was certain. Kaiser was fixated on finding Lucy, refusing to give up. Late one night, Ellen found herself unable to sleep. She sat at the dining table, staring at Lucy's stuffed dinosaur propped in a chair. Kaiser wandered over and placed his muzzle on the table, gazing at her with soulful eyes. She reached out and gently scratched behind his ear. "Thank you," she whispered. It was both a promise and a plea. She thanked him for finding Lucy's clues, for never ceasing in his silent vigil, and she pleaded with him, "Help bring her back." A soft knock on the door startled her. It was Detective O'Leary, wearing casual clothes, her face drawn from sleepless nights. She stepped in quietly, explaining she couldn't rest until Lucy was found. "I've seen cases go cold," she said softly, "but Lucy's dropping breadcrumbs. That doesn't usually happen unless the victim has hoped someone will find them." She paused, her gaze drifting to Kaiser. "I can't ignore the fact that he seems to have a connection to the trail. If we manage this correctly, he might lead us to the final piece." Ellen nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "He loves her more than anything," she murmured. "He won't stop." Detective O'Leary placed a comforting hand on Ellen's shoulder. "Neither will we," she assured, her voice resolute. For the first time that night, Ellen felt less alone. On the 10th night since Lucy's disappearance, an unexpected phone call rattled the Harris household. A distorted voice whispered, "Stop searching, or you'll never see her again." The line went dead before Charles could respond. Ellen, listening from across the room, felt an icy dagger of terror lodge in her chest. She clung to Charles, trembling. Who would call them directly? Did this mean Lucy was still alive, or was it a cruel trick? They immediately reported the call to Detective O'Leary, who traced it to a disposable phone purchased in a nearby city. It was a dead-end lead, but a chilling reminder that they were dealing with someone who could be watching them. The house was put under 24-hour police surveillance. Anxiety spiked, making every creak of the floor and rustle of leaves a potential threat. That same night, Kaiser began pacing the house restlessly. He would trot to the front door, sniff at the base, then scurry to Lucy's room, whining at the closed door before returning to the window. It was as if a storm was brewing in his canine senses. By midnight, his pacing became insistent enough that Ellen decided to take him outside. She wrapped a coat over her pajamas, leading him onto the porch. The night air was cold and still, the full moon illuminating the yard in ghostly silver. Kaiser stiffened, ears pricked forward. A faint rustle came from the hedges near the driveway. Ellen froze, heart hammering in her chest. For a second, she feared it might be the abductor. She called out, "Who's there?" No answer. Then Kaiser lunged, barking frantically. A figure darted out, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard, wearing a stained jacket. He sprinted across the street, disappearing into the darkness. Ellen screamed for help, and a police officer stationed nearby gave chase, but the man vanished among the houses. The officer returned, breathless and empty-handed. Ellen, shaking, described him in detail. She'd never seen him before. It was yet another piece of a monstrous puzzle. The police scoured the neighborhood for an hour, to no avail. Charles, alerted by the commotion, wrapped his arms around Ellen, who stood trembling on the porch. Kaiser was still barking, as if outraged by the trespasser. Sleep was impossible after that. Ellen and Charles sat in the living room, waiting for the first glimmer of morning. Kaiser lay at their feet, eyes ever watchful. They wondered if the man was the one holding Lucy, or merely someone with knowledge of the situation. Frustration and fear coiled like a tight spring in their chests. The abductor was close, taunting them, and Lucy was still out there somewhere, needing their help. Day broke with the promise of answers. Detective O'Leary arrived with a photo lineup based on Ellen's description. From hundreds of mugshots of local criminals, they narrowed it down to a handful of possibilities. One face stood out. Vince Rodriguez, a transient with a history of petty crime, last spotted in the vicinity of Redwood National Park. Ellen felt a chill of recognition upon seeing his eyes. She was almost certain it was him. The police mobilized, distributing the suspect's photo. They checked homeless shelters, bus depots, motels, any place a drifter might be. Hours passed with no solid sighting. Meanwhile, the Harrises grew more desperate. Charles, in a moment of frustration, told O'Leary he wanted to go back into the woods with Kaiser. "We'll find him ourselves," he said. The detective tried to dissuade him, but realized the Harrises were beyond staying put. In the end, she allowed a small team to accompany them, hoping they might corner the suspect. So, once again, Charles, Ellen, Kaiser, and 2 officers ventured into the forest. They headed to the hidden trails near the creek, reasoning this was where Lucy's signs kept appearing. Kaiser's demeanor was intense. He walked with purpose, nose occasionally lifted to the breeze, then back to the ground. The group fell silent, except for the crunch of leaves underfoot. After nearly an hour, Kaiser veered sharply to the right, descending a narrow slope toward the creek. The underbrush was thick, branches scraping their clothes. The sound of trickling water grew louder. Kaiser whimpered, tail wagging in short, anxious bursts. He paused at a cluster of boulders, sniffing around, then barked at a small cave-like opening formed by the natural arrangement of rocks. Charles's heart clenched. It was big enough for a person or two to fit inside, shielded from sight. The officers stepped forward, weapons drawn. "Lucy?" Charles called, voice trembling. There was no reply. One of the officers shone a flashlight inside. It was a cramped space, damp and cold. Then a soft sound emerged, a whimper, followed by a faint cough. Ellen cried out, bolting forward. The officer pulled her back gently but stepped in. He crouched to peer into the recesses of the cave. In the beam of light, they saw a small figure curled into a corner, Lucy, hair matted, dress torn, shaking in fear. Relief and horror swept through them like a tidal wave. While the officer kept guard, Charles and Ellen rushed in, their hearts in their throats. Lucy recoiled at first, eyes wide with terror. But then recognition broke through her fear, and she reached out, sobbing, "Mommy, Daddy." Ellen scooped her daughter up, tears streaming down her face, pressing Lucy to her chest. Charles wrapped his arms around them both. Kaiser barked, then nudged Lucy's leg with unwavering devotion. It was a moment of raw, overwhelming emotion, joy, terror, relief colliding. The child they thought they might never see again was alive in their arms, though shivering, clearly traumatized. Lucy clutched her mother, breath shaky, eyes darting to the entrance as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Where was her captor? As the officers secured the area, Lucy managed to speak a little. She told them she had been taken by a man who threatened to hurt her if she screamed. He moved her around the forest, feeding her scraps, scolding her whenever she tried to leave a sign. But she had left her locket and the torn dress on purpose whenever he wasn't paying attention. She scribbled the note, "Mommy," on a page she tore from her notebook, hoping someone would find it. The man had left to get supplies, warning her to stay put or else. That was the moment Kaiser led them to her. Paramedics arrived quickly, wrapping Lucy in blankets. She was dehydrated, her arms bruised, but there were no life-threatening injuries. The immediate terror melted into sobs of relief. Charles and Ellen held Lucy's hands as she was examined. The look in Lucy's eyes spoke of a deep gratitude for her parents, and especially for Kaiser. who gently licked her cheek as if to say, "You're safe now." The authorities launched a manhunt for Vince Rodriguez, the suspected abductor. Local news blasted his picture, and within hours a tip came in from someone who spotted him near a railway yard. He was apprehended just after sundown, cornered by the police. The motive wasn't immediately clear, some speculated. It was a crime of opportunity. Others thought he might have planned a ransom. But for the Harrises, the why mattered less than the fact Lucy was home. In the days that followed, Lucy underwent counseling to help her recover from the trauma. She clung to Kaiser constantly, refusing to be out of his sight. The dog was her anchor, her steadfast protector, the one who never stopped searching. Even the doctors at the local clinic, some affiliated with Mayo Clinic's national outreach program, noted that having Kaiser close seemed to accelerate Lucy's emotional healing. Rumors and conspiracies that once swirled around the Harrises gradually subsided. The town of Little Haven rallied around them in genuine solidarity, providing meals, moral support, and even funds to help Lucy's recovery. Detective O'Leary visited frequently, ensuring Lucy felt comfortable talking about her ordeal on her own terms. Still, many questions about those 10 days remained unanswered. Only Lucy and Kaiser truly knew the darkest moments of her captivity. In the quiet of a soft twilight, as Lucy lay in bed, Kaiser beside her, she looked up at her parents, still shaken but grateful. "He tried to make me leave you notes," Lucy whispered, "but I only wrote what I wanted. He couldn't watch me every second." Then she turned to Kaiser and patted his head. "You found me. I knew you would." Tears glistened in Ellen's eyes. Charles brushed Lucy's hair gently and kissed her forehead. They all looked at Kaiser, who simply let out a contented huff and rested his chin on Lucy's knee. After all, Kaiser didn't need words. He had shown them what unconditional love and loyalty could accomplish, carrying them through the darkest crisis of their lives, guiding them to a moment of reunion they once feared would never come. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of courage, perseverance, and the extraordinary bond between a little girl and her loyal German shepherd. Lucy's story reminds us that hope can endure even in the darkest moments, and the most steadfast friendships can lead us to salvation. If this tale touched your heart, please give the video a like. Share it so that others can experience Lucy's inspiring resilience and Kaiser's unwavering devotion. And remember to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories that shine a light on the power of love, community, and determination in the face of adversity. Every thumbs up, every share, and every subscription helps us continue telling stories that uplift and inspire. Together we can spread hope and remind the world that when all seems lost, compassion and courage can guide us back to safety. Thank you for watching.